Hi there, my name's Ian Wright, and I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about the effects of meditation on our physical, emotional, and mental health. So, in some ways, I want to talk about what actually does and what is the purpose of meditation. And I'm just going to talk about it in terms of how meditation physiologically affects our body. I'm just going to talk about it briefly, and then I'm actually going to talk about, just run through a little bit of some of the actual elements and things that have been actually researched with regards to different forms of meditation and how they can actually affect a variety of conditions. There's a huge body of evidence actually and on how meditation has affected a wide variety of symptoms and stories. So anyway, I'll come to that. First of all, what is meditation? Meditation actually kind of is, you could think about it if you're using other kind of synonyms, words: contemplation, thought, reflection. It sometimes has a religious connotation, but actually it's defined in the University of Cambridge dictionary as giving your attention to one thing. And I kind of like that, actually, because for me a lot of it is about becoming aware of where your attention is. And I'll come back to that. There's so many different forms of meditation through so many different cultures, certainly Eastern cultures more, but also in Western culture. So in all of our history of the world, there's been this processes of meditation, thought, prayer. Particular threads that I think are important because they're being used a lot these days are methods of mindfulness, which is sort of a Buddhist-based technique where you become aware of your attention and focus on that and become mindful of where you are, and it's a particular element or thread of a technique. There's different forms like some of the Taoist techniques where you're actually using exercises to move energy internally. Also, there are stillness-based meditations which are focusing on stillness and developing and cultivating stillness. There's also prayer, contemplation, mantra, visualizations, work with the breath, which I think is very important. And all of them have different types of effects, which I have actually previously talked about and I will go into because a lot of these threads I quite like. My particular interest is in developing sensory awareness and awareness specifically of attention, allowing that to be moved and moving it, because I think it can be incredibly important, especially in regards to our relationship with nature. But what is the purpose? What actually is the purpose of meditation is a kind of interesting question, really. Why bother doing it? I think, first of all, the most obvious thing to say is, for me personally, life and our minds and our senses are constantly in a state of overwhelm. We're taking in so much information on so many levels through all of our senses all the time. To actually slow the world down almost and engage with a little quiet moment actually is vital. I don't know how I could manage without doing that. I certainly meditate twice actively a day, but my work actually as an osteopath is very meditative, very quiet, and I'm looking at and working with stillness. I'm doing it actually all day, and I travel a lot, and I do it on planes all the time as well. So I'm constantly doing this because I find it incredibly peaceful, incredibly wonderful to connect with this great stillness that surrounds us and also inside us. Also, it helps me personally find insight actually into a situation of problem. If I go quietly into myself, my mind clears. It helps with clarity. It helps with a sense of calmness. It also brings me into the present, because our minds are always wandering off into the past and into the future. And actually part of a meditative process is to allow your mind to do that and not be bothered by that, but be aware of where your mind is. And that in itself brings you back into yourself. And I think there's something wonderful about it. And then there's these higher kind of goals of wholeness, oneness, deep connection. But actually what I want to talk about more today is especially our physical, emotional, and our mental health, and how that is affected by these different meditative techniques. So how does it do that, first of all? Let's look at a little bit for a second about how our physiology is changed and adapted. First of all, I suppose one of the most important parts of it is to do with breathing, how our breathing quietens down. We tend to slightly develop a little bit more on the out-breath, which actually stimulates the vagus nerve, which calms down the sympathetic nerves. So we have these two sides of our autonomic nervous system, which is a kind of regulative part of the nervous system, which one of them is the sympathetic nervous system, which is linked to things like adrenaline and our adrenals, and it's that flight, fight, fright reactive response. It's an immediate kind of excitation, stress-related response, and that the tone in our sympathetic nervous system actually tends to be very high because actually what we're saying that we're overly stimulated. And our parasympathetic side of it, which is more of a rebalancing vegetative kind of state, which calms down the blood pressure, calms down the breathing, the heart rate, and allows the body to go into a rebalancing kind of state. That's very rarely employed because we're overstimulated. But the first thing that meditation can help with is readdress that balance in the autonomics and allow the parasympathetic nervous system to come up, and the vagus, which is one of the main parts of that, to re-regulate our body. Another thing is if we develop this quiet, peaceful place, it literally relaxes our muscles. So all the especially that tone in our shoulders, which is tight, and we hold a lot of tension in different parts in our tummies, or in our pelvis, or in our back, or in our breath, our diaphragm. It tends to relax, quieten, soften everything out, kind of defacilitates this irritation in the nervous system, and helps us, I think, to re-regulate. It actually sends us into a re-regulating kind of way, like when we're sleeping, actually. And there is some evidence to say that memories are consolidated, like when you're sleeping in the hippocampus. So you've got these primary effects on the nervous system, but those effects through this autonomic nervous system actually have an effect. So because actually the parasympathetic nervous system has direct effects on the heart, for example, the heart rate, the blood pressure, as I've said, but it also affects the gut, the motility, the movement in the gut, and relaxes all the different sphincters of the gut to allow normal passage and normal function. It has an effect on the immune system, regulating that out of an inflammatory response. So you've got all of these. So if you build up to doing some good time of meditation, it allows these systems which run through the nervous system, the immune system, even the endocrine system, to come into more of a state of quiet balance. Now, what are the effects of this? Now, this is what's interesting. I just ran through some of the research, actually, just for interest, on meditation and different types of meditation, and actually where they have registered positively researched effects. This is on, I was looking this actually in medically orientated research, which is published research, and there's a huge body of research now. I mean, let's start with chronic pain. The process of working using meditative techniques, especially the mindfulness and this process of accepting the fact that you have pain, allowing that process of pain, and then coming to a state of observing the pain. Also using breath work. Actually, I'm going to do a podcast on this next, about this for chronic pain, because I think it's very important. and because it can actually help really in very severe pain like trigeminal neuralgia or the chronic pain of cancer secondaries, for example. The evidence is, and I certainly have been giving these techniques out to patients for many years now, to just actually allow the person to cope better with pain. And there is a body of research of chronic pain being helped, for example, in back pain or fibromyalgia or regional pain syndrome or tension headaches, migraine, temporomandibular disorders, all this kind of thing. Actually, there is research showed that it helps that, which is lovely. But there's other areas which you wouldn't even think that it actually can be helpful with. Number one, anxiety. Anxiety is a big subject. I'm just in the process of starting to write a book on using sensory awareness and meditative techniques to redress anxiety disorders, which I'm right in the middle of anyway, so more of that later. Other mental health issues, depression, bipolar disorders, there's evidence to show that it helps with all of these. Things like Asperger's, actually, because a lot of Asperger's kids and adults tend to become distressed, actually, by certain situations, and meditative processes have been shown to help with that. Hypertension is very important. Cardiovascular disorders helps to bring down blood pressure. Menopausal symptoms in women have been shown to be helped, but also there's been shown to be this general, as I started to describe a little bit earlier, this decrease in inflammation. And actually inflammation has been shown to be involved with a variety of conditions, from Alzheimer's to cancer to diabetes to cardiovascular problems. So actually decreasing an inflammatory process can help in such a huge amount of areas. Also, there's been some quite good research around meditation slowing down cognitive decline. Okay, which is as we get older, it actually stimulates and changes. Actually, there's been the wonderful thing is now there are all these brain imaging techniques where you can actually see what's happening in the brain to some degree, and it's showing wonderful results. For example, there's a part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex, which is one of the latest developed parts of the brain in our kind of evolutional brain development, and a lot of it's to do with kind of emotional regulation. But the left side of the prefrontal cortex in most people is focused more on pleasure and joy and positive emotions. The right side is more the opposite, displeasure and unhappiness. Anyway, the research has shown actually that in serious meditation, this is done with like Buddhist monks, actually, this meditation, the left prefrontal cortex actually literally grew compared with the right. So it actually changes the brain structure, the synapses, the wiring increases. So there's this whole idea, which I'll talk about, and I have talked about plasticity of the brain, where the brain wires itself, because every time we use a certain part of the brain, it wires up. The synapses still wire up. So actually we have a very organic and changing brain, and it's open to adaptation. So actually you can change the functional shape of the brain by doing certain things, and meditation is very good for that particular part of the brain. Also, actually, there's been shown to be effects of meditation on the hippocampus, which is around memory and processing memory, as I mentioned earlier, and the amygdala, which is related to that preconscious fear response, which is very important in anxiety disorders. And actually the amygdalas tend to get bigger with people who have anxiety. And so it deregulates that. And actually one of the breaks to that in the brain is the prefrontal cortex. It actually calms down that preconscious fear reaction, which is very common in anxiety. Anyway, these are huge areas, and this is just an introduction. Other things, actually, that meditation has been shown to help is things like the common cold, decreased tendency and increased management of the common cold. And one that is a favourite one of mine, because it's very important, I spend a lot of time working with people with, which is sleep disorders. The management of sleep disorders. I won't talk about that anymore now. I'll do separate stuff on that. So you can see, for me and for everybody, we should all be meditating. Anyway, more of this, and I think we'll start going through some of these techniques, and I'm hoping to put together an online course on the dynamics of stillness and sensory awareness techniques and certain meditative processes, which I've been teaching for a long time now. I wish you well.